What if I told you that every person you meet is wearing a mask, not to deceive, but to protect themselves? And what if the key to truly understanding them isn't in what they say, but in what they hide? In this video, we won't just skim the surface of human behavior. We'll dive deep into the unconscious patterns, wounds, and silent truths that shape every action. Drawing from the powerful insights of Carl Jung and Nietzsche, you'll learn how to read people, not to judge them, but to connect with them on a soul level. Stay with me, because by the end, you won't just see others differently. You'll begin to see yourself in a whole new light. Part 1. Masks and the fractures within the soul. Everyone wears a mask, not to deceive, but to avoid being hurt. Carl Jung. From an early age, we are taught to be polite, to smile, to behave properly. But have you ever wondered, are the things we show the world truly who we are? At a board meeting in San Francisco, a man named Daniel, usually soft-spoken and friendly, suddenly burst out in anger when someone gave feedback on his project. That anger didn't come from the present moment, but from an old wound, the feeling of being ignored in his family. The gentle mask he wore couldn't take the pressure anymore, and it cracked. First 3 psychological truths. 1. Everyone wears a mask, not because they're fake, but because they're afraid. In modern society, especially in cities like New York or Los Angeles, where others' judgments can directly impact careers, reputations, and even survival, people are forced to become a socially acceptable version of themselves. A confident smile, a firm voice, a neat appearance. These are masks we build to survive. But those masks aren't deception. They're protection. Beneath them is a soul filled with doubt, always asking, if I were truly myself, would I still be accepted? Carl Jung called this the persona, the social self we construct to adapt. But if we're unaware of the line between persona and the authentic self, we may one day lose ourselves without realizing it. Sometimes even we forget who we are, because we've played the role for too long. So don't judge someone too quickly by what they show you. What you see might just be armor they've learned to wear, to avoid being wounded again. 2. What people criticize in others is what they refuse to accept in themselves. There's a subtle defense mechanism that most people don't realize. Projection. When someone consistently criticizes a specific trait in others, they're often fighting against that same trait within themselves. A college student in Texas used to mock his male friends for being too emotional or too sensitive, especially those who cried or shared their pain. But during a therapy session, he broke down. As a child, every time he cried, his father would shout, "Men don't cry." His emotions had been suppressed so deeply that he learned to hate them, not just in himself, but in everyone around him. Carl Jung once wrote, "We see faults in others more easily because we've learned to suppress them in ourselves." Criticism isn't always rooted in morality. It often grows from an unhealed wound. So next time you see someone overreact to something seemingly harmless, ask yourself, are they truly upset at the person in front of them, or at the part of themselves they were once forced to reject? 3. Silence speaks more than words. In an age full of noise, podcasts, live streams, social media, we're easily distracted by what's being said. But Carl Jung reminds us, we don't listen with our ears, but with our soul. That means the most important messages often lie not in what's spoken, but in the silence between sentences, in the subjects people avoid, in the unexplained sighs. At a group conversation in Chicago, a young woman was asked about her childhood. She smiled and said, "Everything was fine," and then quickly shifted the attention to someone else. But her smile was tight. Her eyes briefly shifted away. No one forced her to talk, but the way she avoided the topic spoke volumes. In that case, silence wasn't emptiness. It was a message. People don't always know how to name their pain, but their body will react, their voice will change, and their eyes will drift. To truly understand someone, you may need to stop listening to their words and start listening to their silence. Part 2. Defense Mechanisms and the Buried Truth. 10 minutes. We are not what we think we are. We are what we hide. Carl Jung. Have you ever met someone who says, "I don't care what others think," yet gets deeply hurt by a single comment? Both Nietzsche and Jung understood this. The louder someone proclaims something, the more they may be trying to cover up an emptiness within. Psychological Truths, 4 to 6. 4. Loud virtue is often pride in disguise. There's a difficult truth to accept. The people who talk about morality the most aren't always the ones who live it. In psychology, Jung referred to this as over-identification with the persona. When someone clings too tightly to the moral image they want others to believe, to the point that they can no longer distinguish between what's real and what's performative. At a small church in Houston, there was a parishioner known for her strictness. She often criticized those who skipped Mass, dressed improperly, or didn't live righteously. But later, the community discovered she had been hiding part of her income to avoid contributing to the shared fund. People were shocked, but if you look deeper, her actions didn't simply come from dishonesty. They came from a deep fear of being judged, of being seen as not good enough. Nietzsche once warned, "The will to morality is often the will to power in disguise." So when virtue becomes a loudspeaker, be cautious, because what may appear to be righteousness might actually be an ego scrambling for a sense of worth in a world full of judgment and complexity. 5. People don't lie to you first. They lie to themselves. People can be incredibly skilled at hiding their feelings from others. But what's even more painful is that they can also hide those feelings from themselves. Jung called this inner self-deception, an unconscious way of protecting the psyche from unhealed pain. In Boston, there was a woman who had just ended an 8-year relationship. To her friends, she always appeared composed. "I'm fine. I don't love him anymore." Her words sounded firm, but at a gathering, someone casually mentioned his name, and her eyes went silent. She didn't cry. She didn't lash out. There was only a faint sigh, just enough for someone sensitive to notice. Her heart had not moved on. When someone says, "I'm fine," they may not be lying to you. They're trying to believe it themselves, because facing the real pain might feel unbearable. And sometimes, they've told themselves the same story so many times, it has become true in their mind. When you understand this, you stop being angry at them for lying and start feeling compassion for how long they've had to live inside that lie. 6. Where someone appears superior is where they fear being inferior. Excessive confidence isn't always a sign of strength. Often it's a cry from a part of the self that has been rejected. Carl Jung called this the compensation mechanism, when the ego inflates one side to mask a hidden sense of inadequacy. In California, a successful tech CEO constantly referenced his Ivy League degrees startup awards, and business triumphs. Every interview became an opportunity to repeat his resume. But in a private therapy session, he admitted quietly, "A teacher once called me stupid in front of the class. Everyone laughed. I never forgot how that felt." His career then became the answer to a wound that was never soothed. His proud speeches weren't about celebration. They were messages to his past self, whispering, "I'm not as worthless as they said I was." Jung once wrote, "What we show off is often what we don't truly believe." So when someone constantly tries to prove they're better than others, don't just see arrogance. See the wounded child inside, still afraid of being called not enough. 7. Most human actions are driven by fear. Humans don't just act out of desire. More often, they act out of fear. Fear of being hurt, fear of rejection, fear of not being loved. And to cope with those fears, we create all sorts of masks: coldness, arrogance, indifference, all just defenses to protect the fragile heart within. At a college graduation ceremony in Philadelphia, a female student, known for being strong and unbothered, suddenly burst into tears when her classmates began sharing memories. Everyone was shocked. She was the one who always said, "I don't care." But that day, through tears, she admitted, "I'm afraid that if I care too much, then when I lose it, I won't survive." Carl Jung once said, "Nothing influences people more strongly than the fear they refuse to face." When someone goes silent, pulls away, or acts coldly, don't assume they don't care. More likely, they're afraid. And what they fear most is feeling forgotten, abandoned, all over again. 8. Criticism is projection. There's a hard truth to accept. What we harshly criticize in others is often something unresolved within ourselves. Carl Jung called this the projection mechanism, when the psyche pushes the unaccepted parts of our own shadow onto the outside world, so we can attack them more easily than confront them. You may have heard your boyfriend frequently criticize others as lazy or undisciplined. He said it so often that you started to believe it was just his principle. But one day, he opened up about his childhood, how his father used to call him useless, a failure. Those words etched themselves into his memory, driving him to overcompensate through constant busyness and judge anyone who didn't match that standard. Jung wrote, "We are often angry at others because they show us something we don't want to see in ourselves." Criticism, then, isn't always an objective observation. Sometimes it's a hidden confession. I was wounded there once. 9. Fake confidence hides guilt. Not everyone who looks strong on the outside is strong on the inside. Some people show up with bright smiles, confident posture, and a firm voice. But one small criticism can send them into a spiral. Carl Jung called this the mask of confidence, a subtle defense created to hide unhealed shame or guilt. In Ohio, there was a pastor known for his cheerful demeanor and optimistic sermons. Every Sunday, he stood at the pulpit with energy and enthusiasm, always encouraging others to forgive and stay positive. But after every service, he would fall into deep anxiety if someone gave even the slightest feedback on his preaching. In a private therapy session, he admitted he had made a grave mistake in the past, one he had never forgiven himself for. The confidence he displayed wasn't peace. It was a relentless effort to escape from guilt. Jung once wrote, "Man's greatest fear is not to be hated, but to be truly seen." And sometimes, what we see on the outside isn't the real person, but a shell forged through years of fear and inner exile. 10. Where there is exaggeration, the truth trembles beneath. Statements like, "I'm always happy," "I never get jealous," or "I don't need anyone," may sound strong, but they are often signs of something deeply suppressed within. Carl Jung once said, "The weaker the self, the louder the ego shouts." Exaggeration is not evidence of truth. It's a cry for help from a part of us that has been ignored for too long. At a conference in Los Angeles, a female speaker stood before the audience, constantly emphasizing that she was always positive and never lets negative emotions affect her. But after the talk, in a quiet moment backstage, she lowered her head and whispered, "I'm afraid that if I'm not strong, no one will respect me." Exaggeration is a form of concealment, hiding fear, pain, or an unmet need. And wherever words become extreme, there is often a fragile truth trying to survive beneath them. So instead of being carried away by loud declarations, listen for what's not being said. That is where the real truth lives. 11. Those who try to control others are struggling to control themselves. When someone becomes obsessed with controlling everything, schedules, emotions, people, it's not a sign of strength. On the contrary, it's often a sign of an inner world in chaos. Carl Jung once said, "What we cannot control within, we try to control in the outer world." In Arizona, a young mother created a detailed schedule down to the minute for her 2 children: meal times, nap times, play times. At first, people admired her as an exemplary parent, but when one small thing went off track, like her child refusing to eat on time, she became visibly shaken, even angry. During a therapy session, she cried, "When I was a child, my home was complete chaos. Every day felt like a battlefield. I never knew what would happen. I swore to myself that when I became a mother, everything would be under control." She didn't control out of arrogance, but because a chaotic past had left her terrified of repeating the same pain. And when that fear goes unhealed, it expresses itself through external control, a desperate attempt to feel safe again. 12. The more someone performs, the emptier they feel inside. We live in an age where the performed self has replaced the authentic self. On social media, people share travel photos, life quotes, and bright, carefree smiles, as if their lives are bathed in constant sunshine. But Carl Jung pointed out, where the true self is not heard, the ego will shout the loudest. In a psychology class in San Diego, a female student known for her popular Instagram page, with thousands of likes on each photo, broke down in tears as she confessed, "Every time I post, I just want to feel like I still exist, like someone out there still sees me." Her beautiful images weren't for showing off. They were a cry for help, silent but desperate. Jung called this compensatory behavior. When someone feels empty, they try to fill the void with external validation instead of turning inward to face themselves. And the more they perform, the farther they drift from their authentic self, afraid that without an audience, they might not be anyone at all. Part 3. Childhood Wounds and the Truth of the Soul. 10 minutes. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Carl Jung. No one begins life from zero. We are shaped by childhood, by silent memories, and what you call your personality may in fact be nothing more than a survival mechanism you've repeated for years. Final psychological truths. 13 to 15. 13. People don't speak from logic. They speak from their wounds. We often assume that people act based on reason. But as Carl Jung once said, behind every argument is a hidden story. A person's words may appear logical, but their true motivation often comes from a wound, from an unresolved memory, from unnamed pain. At a talk show in New York, a guest, a famous writer, confidently declared, "Love is an illusion. It's just hormones and short-term fantasy." The room fell silent, but when the host gently asked about his past, the man's voice cracked. "My father left my mother when I was 5. I saw her cry every night. In that moment, people realized he wasn't speaking from intellect. He was defending himself with words. His opinion wasn't born of research. It was a fortress built from personal heartbreak. We are the same." When someone expresses extreme beliefs, cynicism, or harsh judgments, remember, they may not be reflecting the world, but protecting the part of their heart that once shattered. 14. How someone responds to weakness reveals their true strength. True strength isn't found in how many people someone controls, how many decisions they make, or how confidently they speak. It's revealed in how they respond to vulnerability, both in others and within themselves. Carl Jung called this the strength of egoless compassion, when a person doesn't need to prove anything, but simply shows up with quiet sincerity. One winter afternoon in Chicago, a homeless girl sat curled up on the sidewalk, hugging a worn-out backpack. Most passers-by glanced and looked away, maybe out of discomfort, fear, or not knowing what to do. But one older man stopped, reached into his bag, and handed her a bottle of water and a small sandwich. "Would you like some water?" he asked. It wasn't dramatic. No one filmed it. No one clapped. But in that silent act, a human dignity was reignited. When someone can sit beside pain without flinching, without preaching, without fleeing, that's a sign they've faced their own fear, their own ego. And that kind of strength cannot be faked. 15. The desire to be noticed comes from the fear of being forgotten. Many people assume those who crave attention are arrogant or just showing off. But in deeper psychology, Carl Jung believed the louder the ego, the lonelier the soul. The desire to be noticed doesn't always stem from confidence. It often arises from a quiet fear, the fear of being invisible, of being forgotten in the noise of the world. Have you ever known someone who always had to be the center of attention? They speak loudly, post every day, crack jokes constantly. From the outside, they seem radiant. But if you listen more closely, you'll hear what they're really saying. See me. Acknowledge that I exist. A friend in San Jose once admitted she felt anxious if her posts didn't get enough likes. When asked why, she teared up. "My parents were always working when I was a kid. I ate dinner alone every night. I hated feeling invisible." Sometimes the loudest person in the room is simply a soul terrified they'll never be remembered. 16. They attack others because they're envious. Not all acts of aggression stem from hatred. Often, behind a critical glare or a sarcastic remark lies a quiet envy, a pain born from having abandoned one's own dreams. Carl Jung once said, "We often hate those who live out the part of ourselves we have given up." At an alumni reunion in Seattle, a middle-aged man scoffed, "That guy started a company? He was the worst student in class." But their friends knew the truth. He himself once dreamed of starting a business, stayed up countless nights working on a plan, until he gave it up out of fear, or because his family told him it was too risky. The attack didn't come because the other man was wrong. It came because he dared. He dared to walk a path that the envious one had left behind. Envy isn't a shallow emotion. It's the cry of a silenced soul. And if we're brave enough to listen to it, that envy might just be a reminder. You once dreamed of this. Don't bury it forever. 17. They don't live by beliefs. They repeat their childhood. We often think we are free beings, living by ideals and conscious choices. But Carl Jung reminds us, until you make the past conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Many behaviors, emotions, and choices in adulthood are in fact unconscious replays of childhood patterns that were never healed. A woman in Denver always says yes, always helps, always responds, "It's okay," even when she's hurt. Everyone sees her as kind and gentle. But inside, she feels empty and exhausted. In a therapy session, she whispered through tears, "When I was little, my mom only hugged me when I obeyed or got good grades. The rest of the time, I felt invisible." She wasn't living by her true values. She was following a learned survival script to feel loved. Her kindness didn't come from freedom. It came from a deep fear of being left behind. And as Jung said, if we don't stop to look at our roots, we will spend our whole lives replaying our childhood without ever realizing it. 18. Repetitive behavior is a silent confession. Not everyone knows how to express their pain in words, but almost everyone reveals that pain through repeated behavior. Carl Jung called this the expression of the unconscious, where memories, wounds, and nameless fears become familiar patterns in life, whispering the unspoken. I was hurt here. Someone who keeps disappearing after getting close. It's not because they're careless. It might be because they were abandoned as a child and learned to pull away to avoid being hurt again. Someone who works non-stop. It's not always ambition. Sometimes they don't know how to sit with the emptiness that comes in silence. They don't say it, but their body, their habits, their choices are telling the story of a loneliness no one ever named. Repetition is the trace of an unfinished chapter, and if we're sensitive enough to listen, patient enough to observe, we'll realize no one is truly irrational. They're just trying to survive a wound no one else has seen. Conclusion: you can't read others in order to control them, but you can understand them to love them more gently. Carl Jung and Nietzsche never meant for us to become psyche inspectors, but rather human beings who know how to listen to the shadows inside every soul, starting with our own.